Is everybody ready to go?
Think you get
I'm not
closer.
going. Oh, usually it works pretty good. Is it coming out? I can't hear it. All right. Well, let's get started. I think we should probably just do a round of introductions around the table.
Yes.
We'll start with that. Maybe we'll start with down there. And we'll just go around. Go ahead, Liam. We'll go around the table and introduce ourselves and who we are.
Seven Seeds.
Joe Ewing, FAS Seafoods.
Keith Singleton, Escalator Seafoods.
Norm Pillen, Seafood Producers Cooperative.
Bruce Hale, FAS Seafoods.
Steve Bessick, Pacific Seafood.
David Brindle, Pacific Seafoods. Tyler Goodnight, Northport Fisheries.
Bill Sullivan, Catchment Seafoods. Mark Kelly and John Nagle Company.
Peggy Parker, the Alum Association of North America.
Regina Lanini.
Susan Adair, Dana Besser Company.
Scott Lemay.
And we got some people online. So we don't, is Heather online?
Yes.
Heather is online.
James Phillips, Heather, and Kit Durnell.
James.
But they're not credited, so.
Oh.
Heather, if you can hear me, 5:00. Just got a message up there about what time we're gonna
Yeah,
quit today.
Oh.
I can't hear the people very well.
Can they hear us and we can hear them? Can we try somebody? I didn't hear.
We don't,
Heather said she's talking, but you can't hear her.
Yeah, we just get access.
Perfect.
Hi, Heather. We just gave you mic access, so you should be able to turn on your mic.
and Kit's on there as well. And Jim Phillips.
Oh, you can see him up there.
Yeah.
Oh God, I can't even see that far, Norm.
Heather, you need to turn your mic on your, right now you're off. You have that, you should have mic access if you just turn it on up above.
Jesse. Yeah, she says she's trying, but she's not. Okay.
Okay, I did it. Can you hear me? This is Heather. Can you hear me?
She can hear. Okay, he can hear Heather. Okay, so it's all audio.
Yeah, Kit, I can see that you can hear me, but can you speak and see if I can hear you?
Heather, would you mind trying now?
Yes, this is Heather. Can you hear me? I'm still, Kit, I'm not able to, they're not able to hear me, but my mic is on because you can hear me.
Oh, it was on. It moved that we adopt the agenda. Buddy. Okay. Go ahead, Peggy. A motion.
We need a second, yeah,
Yeah.
someone. Greg second. Okay.
Thank you. I just curious why there isn't an item on the agenda to approve any new members that we should.
We
We've
do have
got,
new members.
we've got 2 accreditations up.
Yeah.
That we will put up and put them up there.
Yeah,
But
actually.
that's the first thing on the
the
agenda.
Yeah.
I guess that's before we adopt the agenda. I guess, yeah, okay.
Oh. Okay, I thought you'd filled it out. So you can just be a guest.
So we've got 2 accreditations.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
Just can't.
Right.
That's cool. Pacific Seafoods.
Right.
And the ACDC, Stephen.
So,
Right.
so also as a
Sorry,
reminder,
copy
anytime
that.
anyone speaks at the table, just make sure you turn on the mics at your table so everyone can hear you online. No worries. Yeah,
Joseph,
we might not be able to hear.
So
them,
it should
but-
be, so 17.
Those two.
Tyler, do we have paper
17.
copies of application for the PAB?
And 9.
Or it's all
for the
new
Or it's all-
Yeah, I think it's.
It's on, they're on here though. I just got, yeah, I would like to see
Or you
that
can just
too.
email the link.
So I guess we have to approve the accreditation before we
Yeah.
approve the agenda, so.
I know we did a round table of
Online.
introductions, but maybe
Yeah.
we should just do that with the list. Who's
And
here,
we
who's
didn't
not.
have any introductions from the people online, who they were. There's Heather and.
Yeah.
I still haven't heard anybody talk online. Is it working or not?
They're back there working on it right now.
Okay, well, there's 2 accreditations. There's Steve Miner from the ADAC Community Development Corporation. And I guess, looking at the history, he was Peter Pan previously, and now he's representing ADAC. I don't know him, and does anybody have any issues or anything with that? Is that okay? Anybody in the room, got anything to say about that?
I'll allow it.
So, thank you. Thank you. So we'll move that he's approved. Do we vote on that or?
No,
We vote on that exactly? Okay, and the second one is Scott Mazzone from Quinault Pride Seafoods.
Yeah, actually, never mind.
All right.
I'm here in place of Brian Perluia, who is our seafood manager. And unfortunately, he was called away last night for a family emergency. Quinault Pride Seafoods is a very small processing plant operating out of Tuhola, Washington, 30 miles north of the mouth of Grace Harbor. Typically, we deal with around 20,000 pounds of halibut every year, with a high of 80,000 pounds, I think, 1 year, but an extremely small compared to the rest of you gentlemen by use.
Okay.
And I have been on this board previously several years ago.
All right. And what's your name, sir?
Scott Mazzoni.
Oh, you're Scott Mazzone on the list. Okay, perfect. I got you. Everybody cool with that? Is that fine? All good? Okay, so what was with you,
I'm
Keith?
trying to fill it out. I didn't know I had to fill it out.
It was too late.
Too
You're
late.
out. No, sorry. You have to leave.
Eject. Eject.
No, that's fine.
Uh,
We'll figure
I'm
out how to
happy to
get you.
join. I'll get it filled out.
Sure. And you represent Lear
Your
Seafoods.
last layer.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
We're gonna have to get him.
Can you take a sec to do that?
Yeah. Did you get his information for accreditation?
Hmm?
So 2 new members for accreditation. That's. Who's teaching?
Steve Miner data. I don't know. Wait, is he here or in person? That was Scott Mazzoni for Quinault, but the ADAC. So Steve Miner, is he online? Is he here? I'm not
Not
sure.
online.
He's not.
Is
he's not
Steve
with-
Miner in the room?
No, not. He's not online. We accepted his accreditation, but we don't have him participating. Is that right?
Did not receive any request for online participation.
Okay, so he's,
Or proxy?
or an a proxy. Okay.
Mr. Chair, should we just do a roll call, name vote of the people on the list, because we got some
Yeah.
people online.
Yeah, it's
Some people-
confusing for sure. Yeah, I think the introductions cause more confusion than they
Yeah.
do clarify anything. We'll just go down the list here. So Heather's here online somehow, and we're gonna be able to talk to her
Yes,
sometime. Okay. Jesse, we heard anything? Is Jesse around?
Jesse, are you online?
Is she accredited?
She's accredited.
Yeah.
Yes.
Seafoods, but she is not in the room.
Okay, so she's not here yet. Okay. Susan's from Bessaker. Yep. Okay. Nobody from Icy Straits either, Tim? Not here? Oh, yeah. And hasn't been on it, so they're not, so
Yeah.
he's not here. He's
And
not here.
Hank Baumgart from Taco Fisheries is not here either?
It's the same guy.
Same, yeah.
Icy Straits and Taku is here.
So they're not present.
They're not here and Tim doesn't work for them anymore. Okay. Bill Sullivan's here. He's good. Tyler's here.
This will be your voting.
Greg's
I'll
here.
I'll go over it a little bit later.
So who's OBI got now?
Greg.
Greg? Oh, okay. You're not, no Peggy, no John in here? Okay, Greg, it's good. Norm,
No, I'm not
are
here.
you here? Yes, you are. Steve Miner, we don't know.
That's Canada, right?
Kit is online,
No.
but no.
No, Kid is Greg Ingerland
Oh,
representing.
sorry, okay. Kit is Greg. Dave Brindle, yeah. Mark Callahan, yeah. Jeff Granum. Anybody know anything about that? Wind and Tide, doing business as Peninsula Seafoods. I don't know him.
I know him, so.
Jeff Granum?
Jeff
No,
Granum
he's not online
is
either.
not here. Jeff Choinsky, am I butchering your name? Alaska Fish Factory. Not here, not online.
Not online.
Peggy Parker's here. Nicole Kimball.
Not here.
Pacific Seafoods?
No, she
Oh,
confirmed to the
Processors
secretary that she
Association.
was not attending.
Yeah, she's not here. Scott Mazzoni's here. Okay, Canadians. Nick Harris, Casey and Ross, I see you came in. Did you guys get set up with your clicker for voting? You're all good? Bruce Hale, Carl Nordman, Liam Stockwell. Okay. And then we're gonna credit Keith here
Singleton.
shortly. Keith Singleton. The best way to talk about people is behind their back. for sure.
Not this crowd.
All right, that's Alaska leader.
I think we should work on Jeff Branham for a while.
Sure. So he's not here. Okay. That was a good suggestion. Okay. So now we can move to adopt the agenda. Any seconders? Second. Peggy? Okay.
Question. Mr. Chair.
Hmm?
Can I suggest an addition to the agenda?
Yes.
At the end of the agenda, I would like to propose that we discuss setting bycatch limits in the Gulf of Alaska, based on ABN, trawler fleet, same thing that happened in the Bering. Let's talk that through.
So do we want to have one of the scientists speak to it during their presentations?
I don't think we need to have any scientists. I think we just need to note to my suggestion is that we note to the commissioners that we would like them to support that.
Support the concept of
Yeah.
limits without actually
Yes.
setting
Because
limits?
I mean, it's not their venue, right?
Okay.
But they could at least support it.
Okay, well, maybe they could talk about what mechanism it would take to even do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Would that fall under other
Other
business?
yeah.
And that would leave other business open for anything that might occur to someone at the end of the day?
I think it's a good idea.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Can't imagine that happening.
Okay, so we.
We have a second and a motion.
Second, a motion.
Anybody opposed to accepting the agenda as amended? Seeing none, the agenda is approved.
We don't get to click?
No, not on the agenda.
Gee whiz.
It's coming. It's the next thing on the agenda though, Bruce.
Good. Okay. So now we're going to get a lesson on clicking.
Okay.
While you're getting ready for that, I would just sure people online, sometimes it gets challenging to catch your screens all the way at the other end of the room and hard to see. So if you got something to say, get our attention. Thank you.
Chair, may I make a brief comment regarding the observers in the room? If there are any observers in the room, I will circulate a sign-up sheet, and if you're so kind to put your name down, organization, and email. Can you identify yourself if you're observers?
I think they might have all signed in on the sign-in sheet.
Okay, so real quickly, I'm just going to go through your guys' clickers for voting. This is just real quick, take 5 minutes, but I think you guys used them before. So each of you guys who are voted accredited voters should have a clicker with your acronym on the side. So anytime that the vote is opened, you can click the button with your corresponding vote. So 1A equals yes, 2B equals no, 3C equals abstain. And anytime while the vote is open, you guys can change your vote at that point, right? The chairs will then announce when the vote is closed. And well, when you hit the button, that means it'll turn blue and you'll see it on the screen. When we close the vote, then you'll get to actually see and verify what your actual vote was. So just make sure you check to make sure that the right vote was actually input.
How do you correct?
We'd have to do another vote if it wasn't right. But so
I decided to say no.
yeah, you can change it as many times as you want before we close it. Yeah, you just hit the button, right? And so you can change the vote anytime while the vote is open. There'll be those corresponding letters will equal either yes, no, or abstain. So you can see actually in the window on your voting clicker. And the chair closes the vote, verify the letter number, and clicker on the screen matches. So we do have one online voter, but I do believe that Heather's still having problems, right? Okay, so I won't go through this portion because this is all intended for online voters. We only have one, which we can work with her on the side, I think. But once the voting is done, just so you have an idea of what it'll look like. We'll close the vote and then you'll have corresponding colors to yes, no, or abstain will pop up looking like this. And then if you guys just give me a minute while I process all of the votes, I will then, it takes a minute because we got to go back out of Adobe Connect, then go back into our software, then come back in and we'll have a actual breakdown by country, the vote totals, and we can look at it that way. So, I think that's pretty easy. So why don't we just go ahead and do, Joseph, if we want to do the vote now, a test vote right now for the people that are inside the room. And then we can work with Heather on the side and try to get her signed up online. How's that work? Does that work?
So do you have a matrix with the names that you put up there?
Yeah, so I'm going to get that going right now if you guys want to do that. Okay, so if you will go ahead and share.
Get Keith on there.
Sharing, okay. So then I'll write that down. Okay, so so Joseph had put up what we were voting on potentially. And then at this point, we could say that the vote is open. And now you guys should be able to vote. Let's make sure all of our clickers are working. It'll be highlighted in blue if it recorded your vote. Looks like we have a handful. And I don't.
Kaku's not here. PSPA is not here. There's a few that aren't.
Okay. So yeah, everyone that has clickers in their hands now, they're all highlighted, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
So it's 1-7.
Okay. So as soon as everyone's in and the chairs at this point will call vote closed.
Didn't we talk about having to show your vote?
And we'll give you, this is your breakdown. So make sure it voted the way that you intended. All right. And then our Keith is gone. So we'll usually put up a verify.
So it just shows that you voted initially and then you.
And then I'll go in the
reveal-
back end when Kenny's here, he'll put up another slide that says, hold on, wait while we do this. But
It was kind of a trick question, Tyler, because we haven't finished our visit yet. There's a lot of things that could happen.
yeah, that one didn't show up. I'm gonna work with that in a second. Sorry about that. Yeah. Yeah, this takes, it'll be faster the more times I do it, believe me.
Takes a couple of years before they count your vote or listen to you or anything, no matter what you say.
Mr. Chairman, there's a note up there from Jim Phillips asking if I could introduce him. Should I take this time to do that?
If you see things written up there,
I can
you
see
say
it.
them, because I can't see them.
Okay. Jim Phillips is a friend from Alaska. He's a lifelong halibut fisherman. Him and his wife are pretty active. He's actually on the board of directors now for SPC. And he just wanted me to introduce them. They're both live in Pelican, Alaska. And great guy and good fisherman, and like to have his opinion in the room. So thanks, Jim.
Is he a processor or is he a member of the public who would like to?
He's a
just-
member of the public. Yep.
Excellent, thanks.
So
Welcome,
he's an
Jim.
observer?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so this is what it'll look like when the vote is ready here. It took a little bit longer than I expected, but it should be, I'll get faster. You guys can start timing me unless you get up there in 40 seconds or so. So that'll be what it's like. And I'll work on getting you set up over there, Keith.
Just threw a huge wrench into the whole thing.
Okay. And then you're gonna enter Heather onto the matrix as compiled up there? Or we
Yeah,
gonna
we're
just
trying to work
add
on the
her
back
on?
end to get her figured out. But
Mhm.
hopefully we can, by the time we get some.
Okay.
Are we doing another run through or are we just moving on?
No, I think we should just.
Okay.
And then arrangements for the session, voting procedures, and now we're gonna have the. Okay, we're gonna have a presentation from Alan Hicks.
Yeah, it's pretty good though. Okay, okay. Just don't interrupt too loudly, Norm. Okay, yeah, okay, so I think everybody here has seen my presentation. We don't need to walk through that.
Multiple times.
Yeah, yeah. And so really, I'm just here to answer any questions. I think there was good discussion today about a lot of items in here that were of interest to stakeholders during the public testimony. And then I also just want to give a plug to anyone that would like to be a part of the MSAB. I can't remember where the processor membership currently is, but you're always welcome to be an observer at an MSAB meeting, and we try to give everybody a voice at our MSAB meetings. And it's really a great way to be involved with the management of Pacific Halibut. We get into some details. And the MSAB directs a lot of the work that I do. So if you're interested, just feel free, email me anytime, come chat with me, whatever. Scott Mazzoni's on the MSAB since day one, I think, right, Scott? Great contributor, and Peggy's been on the MSAB as well. I can't remember who else, but it's a really fun group. But I'm here to answer questions. I can answer some stock assessment questions as well, but we can bring Ian in to answer any questions that you may have from him also.
Alan, is there opportunity to attend those meetings virtually?
Yes, so the MSAB has been completely virtual since 2020, actually. And although we're having the meeting in Juneau in May this year, it will be hybrid. And so we definitely make sure everybody's included and can hear everybody's voice.
Juneau's pretty close to Sitka. I might be able to make that.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. But the general concepts that I talked about this morning were different objectives of the fishery, noting these absolute spawning biomass objective that a lot of the stakeholders were testifying about this morning. And then the harvest strategy policy, defining what the reference sort of TC wise, how they're determined in the, and getting that document endorsed by the commission. And we don't have to have questions now. If you don't want, we can, I'm here all week. So
How many slides is on your?
it's 23 slides, I think, something like that.
I took a few notes this morning, but you weren't able to comment up in the conference room. I think some of your slides might prompt some questions from some of the people as we go through.
Sure.
Can we just flip through them?
Yeah, I can show you a couple summary slides. So that might be good. So it talks about the harvest strategy policy, about management. So let me go to the summary of objectives. So we really discussed two different objectives with the MSAB. One was that changing that word optimize to maximize yield. And I think that just improves the objective in terms of how to evaluate it. Optimize is just a vague term. The SRB was pretty happy about that. And then also the second objective that we discussed was this maintaining the spawning biomass at or above a relative spawning biomass of 36%, which sort of equates to a maximum economic yield concept that we estimated in 2019, I believe. But also potentially bringing in this new objective related to absolute spawning biomass. And that is, it just seems there's concern about where the stock currently is at these low catch rates, low spawning biomass. And some people are looking like, we don't like where we're at. And so we talked with the MSAB, is this an objective? The MSAB didn't actually have a strong statement about whether to introduce this as an objective, but instead stated it as, there's benefits of this objective, there's benefits of the stock status or relative spawning biomass objective as well. So the objectives that we're proposing for the commission to adopt are on the right-hand side there. And really what's in red text are the only changes to their current priority objectives. What I would like to see is an additional objective added that says maintain the short-term spawning biomass above the level that it was estimated at in 2023. And the reason there is 2023 was when we really started hearing a lot of concerns about spawning biomass, and like, we just don't want to go to levels that are that low. So that's the objectives. You can pause there for a second, see if it prompts anybody with any questions.
What was the level in 23? Do you remember the number?
I don't remember the number, and that's why I've phrased it as the estimated value in 2023. As you saw in Dr. Stewart's presentation, that number's actually been changed. Every stock assessment, it's being updated actually lower than it was. And so I think it's good to phrase it as the value that it was estimated in 2023, because I feel a lot of the stakeholders in the commission in 2023 felt this is not a good place to be, or we don't want to get lower than where we're at now. We don't need to know where we're at now. We just know we don't want to be lower than what that was. So whatever that was estimated to be, whether that's 100 million pounds or 500 million pounds, regardless, we don't want to be there. So it's more of a reference point in that sense, not an absolute number.
Would we be using the uncorrected reference point of 2023 or the corrected reference point of 2020?
It would be.
It wouldn't be much different, but
it would be it would be actually be the most recent estimate of 2023.
Thanks.
So from the 2025 assessment, what it's estimating 2023 to be. Next year, it'll be from the 2026, what the 2023. And so in the MSE simulations, you saw there's a lot of variability there. The estimate in 2023 can be all over the map, but it's always relating it back to what it thinks it was. So it's a nice way to not define an actual number that can have serious consequences if estimates change, but it's always being updated with our best knowledge.
Question. So if you're proposing a new objective of, not going below that 2023 point, what effect do you feel that's going to have on a control rule or 2040 control rule present?
Good question, Scott. And so just defining this as an objective, all that would do was have an effect of how we evaluate the management strategy evaluation results and what we put in the harvest strategy policy. It might not change the current management at all, but I think it does open the door to then consider, okay, if this is an objective and this is an important objective, what might we do to make sure that we don't go below that level? And that would be the next step. And the MSAB could then say, let's investigate a control rule that's based on those as reference points rather than relative spawning biomass reference points. And so what I'm going to do, I wrote down in my notes, is the commission over the last 3 years has reduced the quota from the reference value. I think in 3 years ago, it was like a 52 million pound reference TCY, and the commission said, no, we'll set it at 39 or whatever it was. So the commission is already imposing this sort of control rule. And I believe they're imposing this control rule of risk of dropping the spawning biomass any lower. And so I think there de facto, there is a control rule there. And I think that's something the MSAB should, that we'll present to the MSAB and see if that's of interest.
From what we've been seeing in the last couple of presentations, that we're seeing that now we're using less fish data and more fishing data to make our estimates. And every time we're changing the model, if you will, our degree of certainty is probably worse than it's been for a long, long time, especially with bad fish data from last year. So there's these, we used to all freak out when there was little tiny adjustments or changing the model or fighting over bait or fighting over little things like that. We're moving some broad strokes now. And this modeling is all based on the probability of stock decline over 2 generations or whatever your parameters are. Like, we're anecdotally, certainly on the Canadian side, from what I'm hearing from everybody, we don't believe that it's even as good as the bad you're saying. Like, it's bad, and everybody's saying bad, and the Alaska guys are saying bad, and the out west guys are saying unbelievably bad, like historically bad, almost everywhere. It's almost historically bad in BC as well, I would say. Close enough to call it historically bad anyways. So,
and you're talking catch rates in terms of what you're saying is bad?
Yeah, we're going to FIS and we're going to the, to the model. It almost opens the door to bring in anecdotal more than it has in the past, because no matter how close we adhere to the science, the one thing about IPHC historically is we get right to the very end and the pen's just coming down to the paper, and then all the anecdotal guys start screaming and yelling, and we change it anyway. So there always is an anecdotal element to this, more than any other board I've ever been on. So my input to this as we go through it all is going to be to push for more reduction. I'm sorry, but I think the fishermen are pushing for reduction more than anybody else, including the science this year. What I'm hearing, I don't know. Anyways, we can move on.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I would suggest that we be looking at a floor too. I mean, there's got to be a point where if it's going to get that bad, that we just,
maybe Ian would talk about that. Would he not? About what does it look like? What does a floor look like?
Potentially a floor in terms of a minimum TCY that would be implemented, or a floor in the sense of,
I guess we sort of have that, but I guess how we arrive at, are we at the floor is in flux a bit right now, isn't it?
What do you mean by a floor?
A low TCEY.
Okay.
my idea of a floor is a stop fishing point. It's a tipping point where we're deciding,
Based on
we're done.
TCEY,
Yeah,
right? That's what I'm
yes.
saying, how we
Yep.
arrive at TCEY is in flux in a way right now.
Yeah, and so that's what I was talking about with the control rule. Right now, the control rule would halt directed fishing if the stock status was below 20%. And there's an 11% probability, according to the stock assessment model, that
Yeah.
we're below 20%, which, as you noted, that increased from last year, which is partly due to increased uncertainty as well. But what I would like to talk with the MSAB about is what you're calling a floor, a control rule that is more dependent on an absolute level of spawning biomass. You know, you can relate that to like your catch rates. If your catch rates drop to 10 pounds per skate or whatever, you know, it's like, wow, we shouldn't even be fishing out there. What's some good alternative reference points and control rule that would then create a floor or create reductions in fishing intensity? That would be part of the management procedure instead of these relying on anecdotal information and more discussion, but where stakeholders can feel comfortable. It's like, this way of managing is going to reduce fishing intensity when I feel that it should be reduced. And so that's really the goal of the MSE work, is to develop a management procedure that people are comfortable with. And right now, they're departing so much from the reference value that people aren't comfortable with what the reference value is, and they want to either go below it or whatever.
Go ahead.
I really am intrigued by what you said and wonder if you could give us an example of an alternative management procedure besides CPUE or WPUE.
Sure, we can say we operate under this reference SPR of 43%. And when the stock is high, we follow the reference 43% SPR, and we have 60 million pound quotas and whatnot. The stock's doing great, everybody's doing great, everybody's happy. And so 2012, 2013 comes along, and the stock has been declining for a while. And now we all of a sudden are below, say, we're at a level that is double what we saw in 2023, the spawning biomass estimated in 2023. So say in 10 years from now, we're at a level that's double that. And we're like, okay, that's where we want to start having concern. So maybe we start sliding the fishing intensity lower, start fishing at an SPR 45%. The spawning biomass continues to decline. We're like, okay, let's continue sliding the fishing intensity lower. So now our reference is 48%. You know, the commission's been adopting SPRs of 51, 52% in recent years. So, but then let's say, oh, it is 3/4 of the level that we estimate it was in 2023. So that's when we halt directed fishing. So that's the two control points in our control rule now. They're dependent on the spawning biomass, which is you can think of as a proxy for catch rates.
Sorry, but how is that different from what we do now?
So right
I'm
now,
sorry.
this is really complex stuff, and this is good to talk about it, because right now we're using relative spawning biomass, as Ian explained, is measuring only the effects of fishing and not the effects of the environment. So we're at 38% stock status, and that's great to measure how well we're managing the stock and separating out the environmental effects on the stock. But we're at a place now where there's environmental effects on the stock. There's been low recruitment, low weighted age, and there's concerns. It's like, we don't like this catch rates. We don't like how the economics of the stock. So we actually do want to bring to reduce fishing pressure because of fishing effects and environmental effects. So this absolute control rule would have both, whereas now the relative spawning biomass says everything's fine because you're managing the stock very well. It's just at a very low point. And other people have concerns about at the low spawning biomass, there might be recruitment failure. We just, we don't know, there's some risk there. So managing a little bit differently on those risks and not letting the stock get to a absolute level that's really low. It's sort of what this objective and a potential control rule would do. So that's the objective. And then the next section we talked about was, well, one thing we talked about was the potential reductions in these FIST designs. If we keep reducing the FIST design, we're going to see lower TCYs on average and more variability from year to year on average. So that's probably not a great thing. And the SRB asked us, well, what would that equate to if it was $6 a pound US? And each reduction in one of these designs is about $2.7 million lost to the fishery. So that we thought was a useful thing to think about. And then this is the results of the analyses we did. And these are the tables where the MSAB made a recommendation to update the management procedure to go to a triennial stock assessment frequency and update the reference SPR to a 46 rather than a 43%. And these are newer results, and it showed the triennial stock assessment frequency actually reduced the interannual variability and increased the TCY on average slightly. So it was sort of a win-win there, and the SRB thought that sounded good too. So that's the general results of the analyses. Let's see here. And then the application, this was the illustration. If you want to take a look at the MSE Explorer, I'm always happy to sit down and show people too, but this is some new stuff which has helped some of the MSAB members really understand what MSE simulations do. And, you know, when you look at these median lines and then the uncertainty, you're like, oh, wow, we could be, you know, we should be harvesting 60 million pounds. But we're actually on one individual trajectory. We don't know which trajectory. Right now, we're on a pretty poor trajectory. But in 10 years, we might be up here. In 10 years, we might be down there. We just don't know. So there's a lot of uncertainty in this. And then this harvest strategy policy table is analogous to the decision table, except using MSE simulations to get a longer term look at if you've managed at one of these SPR values. This is what it would look like. And this is formatted the columns are the same as the decision table. And then, so the MSAB recommendation, and then, it's good to note that there'll likely be some workshops and special session to consider the harvest strategy policy by the commission for adoption in 2025. And then this is sort of a summary of all the different recommendations that we were hoping the commission would consider. Small text from back here in this room. Yeah. That's it in a nutshell.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Mr. Chairman, this is Heather. Can you hear me?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
And I just observe here, but it seems to me like every time a poor fishing area happens in halibut, we start reducing that to get the spawning biomass up. Closer. Would it not make sense to do it to the where the fishing's good, where there's more fish? So if you go down 15%, you're going to get twice as much spawning mass as a bad area, and this is a fish that's migratory. So why are we not doing it all together and like instead of areas? Because as fish moves, we know that. And if you're taking it off a fishery that's doing well, you're taking hundreds of thousands of more pounds for sure. I just don't understand why it's so broken up and why we're not doing it as a kind of team.
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's a really good note that where the fish are today, we don't know where they're going to be tomorrow. So a fish that was in 3B last year, or concerns about say 3B fishing was really good, that fish, all those fish could move pretty quickly out of that area and all of a sudden be in a whole different area. I think a really good concept to think about, and that we've been trying to think about, is sort of this regional diversity and maintaining some sort of regional diversity, making sure we have populations in these 4 different biological regions we've defined. And if we maintain some level of spawning biomass in 4 different biological regions, then we're likely, when those conditions are right in that region, to have a good recruitment. But you're right, saving spawning biomass in an area that was high last year might actually benefit other areas because the fish aren't moving throughout there. And you've seen how much the proportion of O32 fish estimated from the FIS has changed. It's dropped quite considerably in region 3, but has gone up quite a bit in region 2 in the last 10 years. Yeah. So I can also grab Ian and see if he's ready to come over and send him over whenever you guys would like.
That would be good. Yeah, thanks, Alan.
Yeah, no
Any
problem.
more questions for Alan?
This is apropos of nothing, but I'm curious. Can you define what a nursery would consist of?
A nursery area for Pacific
Yeah.
halibut. So Joseph would actually be one to define this better, perhaps. I'll give it a good start though, if you want. Yeah, he's busy taking notes or something, but the life stages of halibut are they tend to settle in shallower areas, and as they age, they move out into deeper areas, and then as they beyond 2, they can start moving really fast between these different regions. So a nursery area, as I think about it, is these areas where the eggs can settle and the young can rear, and that could be a pretty big area. They might be 1 year old and moving out deeper, and 2 years old and moving out deeper. So it just depends. I mean, we don't have a lot of good understanding of where the mortality is really occurring for Pacific halibut. Is it when they're in their egg stage? What causes a good recruitment? Is it survival from egg to settlement? Or is there survival from settlement to where they move out to this deeper area as age 1? Or is it getting to age 2? So I think that's a little bit of work that we can do is define different rearing areas, maybe you call them, for the different stages of them as well. But I don't know how Joseph would define the nursery area, but I think there's different areas where they rear as they age.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And our understanding is that after fish are finished spawning in the areas that we know that are traditional spawning grounds, which may not cover the entirety of the spawning grounds, at least the ones that we know, those eggs are passively transported into the nursery areas, some with favorable conditions and some with unfavorable conditions for the larvae. So there may be a potential mortality event related to whether it's a good versus a bad nursery area. But that usually happens at 6 months after fertilization. So after 6 months, they reach those shallow nursery areas and they can remain there up to a couple of years. And that's really where the bulk of the juvenile growth takes place. So, we've heard about, interspecific and intraspecific competition. That most likely happens in nursery areas. So those are areas that are susceptible to environmental change because they're shallow. So temperature could actually have a huge effect on growth and productivity. So that's the life stage at those nursery ages. I think is quite critical for determining whether that's going to be a good recruitment year or not. And not all nursery areas will have the same effect. So I think what Alan was implying is that we really know very little about the nursery areas.
Are the areas all shallow?
Typically, there are shallow areas, and typically they're up to 50 meters in depth. There were a number of studies conducted in the late 1990s where they mapped some of those nursery areas in the Gulf of Alaska. But those are typically, and probably one of the best known nursery areas is Bristol Bay in the Eastern Bering Sea, Southeastern Bering Sea. But they're not very accurately mapped, and that's something that we would love to have in order to link spawning areas with nursery grounds, and then try to understand how fish move out of those nursery areas and then fill in the adult population. So
Hey, Carl?
Is there any concern, like I know that in recent years, it shifted, like as long as I've been coming to this, the spawn happens from sort of November, late November to March. Like, is there, now that we've pushed the season basically to first week of December, or we're fishing on that spawning biomass? Is that a concern for anything?
Sorry, can you ask me?
Like, now that we're fishing into spawning season as a commercial fishery, is there any concern? Are we affecting that spawning biomass by fishing on it, actively fishing on it while it's in the early stages of spawning?
It's hard to say. I mean, if we're setting a quota, then, they'll catch those fish where they were before they started heading back to go to spawning. But there is the potential that spawning could be disrupted while fishing on those spawning. But I don't know if that's true or not. So we don't really have any evidence of that.
Greg, Peggy?
I'm going to follow up on Carl's question. And this is just information. So the very best fishing that we saw in the Gulf of Alaska this year in 3A was in late November out front. And my take as a fisherman is that they were gathered spawning. And now guys know about it. So I would think that it is a good reason to shorten the season to, those fish are concentrated, and we're having this issue that we are with basically crashing population, that would provide some protection. And I've had this conversation with several people in here that we want a shorter season, A, because of lack of production, but B, because we feel that we need to protect these fish because they are concentrating. And if the season's open, somebody's going fishing. So it's more of a comment than a question.
Yeah.
Peggy?
This is the one that is going to really embarrass me to say it out loud, but as processors, don't you guys actually see a lot of eggs in the females when you're processing?
Fish are dressed when they come to the dock.
Oh, sorry. I know it was a stupid question.
No, but you can't, right? If he was fishing in November.
Yes, let me just.
Yes, they'd be full of eggs.
Thank you.
The black cod fleet's out right now and the fish are all full of roe. The science on it is if you're going to catch that animal, I understand what you're saying, but I don't disagree with you at all. But the other side of that is you're going to put more fishing effort and do more habitat and cover more ground fishing the fish when they're spread out in the summer than you would just catching your quota in the winter. And you catch a fish in the summer that was going to spawn in the winter, it still is going to spawn whether it's got eggs in it or not. I'm not even disagreeing with you, Greg. I'm just saying you can argue just as hard both ways on that.
Yeah, there's a lot of points on all sides of this, especially when we're talking fishery catch rates. And it is useful to note that with the FIS design being reduced, more uncertainty in the FIS, the stock assessment is relying on the catch rates more now. And if fishing patterns are going to change in some way, whether it's finding these aggregations and having higher catch rates because of that, that could potentially introduce a uncertainty and a bias in the stock assessment as well, with more reliance on the catch rates. Or we have to figure out a way to analyze catch rates in a more consistent manner.
Go ahead, Greg. Oh, I thought you were putting your hand up.
That's what we learned from Dr. Cox, right? Sean is like, okay, we want this, not that.
Sean's pretty smart. I wish we could have him here to talk to us. Actually.
Yeah.
Great.
There's a lot of opinions go
Well-
both ways. I made the analogy this morning that you don't want to butcher the cow right before it calves, but at the same time, I hear from, I've heard from management from years that a removal is a removal and doesn't really matter when it is. It's managing by removals.
So science is adjusting how they weigh these factors. So we all sit in here and argue and say, well, we'll just defer to science. Well, that just means instead of 20 of us deciding how to weigh those factors, there's 2. And God help you to argue with Ian on anything. He'll just eviscerate you with your tail between your legs. But we should have more input into how they weigh it, I think. I mean, maybe he could speak to how much they have changed the weight and how they do arrive at their final conclusion. Maybe when he's here, well, that would be a good question for him.
Yeah, it's really, to give you an idea, it's what the estimated uncertainty is of it going in. So with the FIS being more uncertain, and we do it, we analyze the data, but we estimate the variance, say, and that variance is increasing on the FIS, and the weight is inverse to that variance. So the higher the variance, the less weight it gets. The catch rates are staying about the same variance. So you see, that's how the catch rates are now. The fishery is getting the weight in the assessment model, having variance. So if we get a better FIS survey, then that's going to start turning around. The model's going to start listening to the FIS because we believe it. It's more accurate.
Yeah.
Dr. Hicks, have you been involved in any of the chalky fish studies at all?
I have not. Josette might know a little bit more, but I think Claude Dykstra has been involved in some of those studies in the past, but I haven't. There's not much going on anymore on those studies.
That is a topic that was actually raised by the Research Advisory Board on several occasions. And we actually tried to at least survey the different plants, and we send out questionnaires to a number of plants for several years in a row. We got a little response that was an issue at that time. And I'm talking probably up until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, right at the beginning of COVID. So we got relatively little feedback, and our conclusion was that at that time, that may not have been a serious issue. I know that the commission years ago in the late 90s conducted some explorations as to what potential causes for chalkiness in halibut were, but based on the lack of response or interest in the topic, we did not pursue it.
I brought it up because I was just thinking about we're seeing a slight increase in incidents in Southeast, which is chalky fish has not really ever been an issue. But we're seeing an increase, and it's most noticeable for us in the fall. And I'm just wondering if spawning fish have anything to do with that. And maybe that's a health thing. Maybe they're concentrating, like a spawning salmon, they quit eating when they were spawning. Does halibut do the same thing? And is that potentially a concern? It's not a big concern. I mean, it's a very small percentage, but it does seem like it's on the increase.
Well, Ian's still talking to the conference board, but I'll send him over as soon as he's available. Or I can answer if you guys have any urgent questions, I could answer.
I got a hunch Ian's going to be busy for a while up there myself.
I got a quick one on, because we were really studying that chalky and figuring also. What we found with our fishermen is heavy tides. So in heavy tides, it seemed to go up in the chalky department. So, I mean, that's just a theory that they're stressed and they're moving a lot, but that was something we've seen a bit in our fish when they were in heavy tides. We got more chalk. So I don't know. That's over the last 5 years.
Carl, I think you guys have spent more time on chalk than anybody that I'm aware of. You know, you were doing pH testing and depth and
Yeah, if I had an answer for it, I would not share it.
Isn't that this business? Yeah. But I don't.
Yeah, that don't work.
But on the chalky fish thing, it mostly seems to be like areas that are more prevalent, or, you know, hot spots, and that seems to be, you know, like fish that come out like cookie cutters, you know, every identical fish, they're more likely to be chalky compared to like a, you know, I call them family fish, you know, when you have like mixed sizes and stuff, and when you have mixed sizes, it seems like there's very little chalk involved. And then, the other thing that's been showing up with me is, the pus pocket fish, the Chilgungaya, I guess, or
Hanagaya.
yeah. So that's just something I've seen more of just like
I've seen more of it
anecdotally.
too.
In halibut.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's been like the last 5 years. It's like each year a little bit more, a little bit more.
Yeah, it's not huge volume for us,
No.
but we're seeing more of it.
But it's always
Yeah.
the expensive fish, right? It's always the really good ones,
More microphones.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really interesting that we've been hearing about Hanagaya for a long time. And we brought it to the technical guy at ASME who talked to ADF&G about it. He said ADF&G has seen zero of that in halibut. It's a salmon thing.
It's a salmon thing for sure.
So I don't know.
We're getting it in pinks and chums and coho. And
Jellyfish.
Jelly belly, that's.
jellyfish and Hanagaya aren't the same thing. Yeah.
It's a parasite, though, right?
No, they don't. They don't look anything near the same. Pus pockets they're grim. I know we sold one to Bo Jackson once. He freaked out in Chicago. Came all the way back to the fishing grounds. Bo doesn't know chums, I guess. Yeah, it's funny you say when they're cookie cutters. When they're cookie cutters, they're travelers, right? When they're homesteaders, you get the maybe it's the lactic acid from traveling. I've heard the lactic acid theory before, but how do you quantify that? A fish that fights, or it's like a deer that runs and spoils the meat when they're hunting.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Keith.
Is it trout fishing, like when you're doing offload and homer, is that like during the course of the season when there's time when it's more than?
Yeah, towards the middle and end of August, like that starts really.
Hearing, so like all of a sudden, like one like famous areas right on the 3A border, and just don't even go there. Bumble Bay and things like that. Just don't even think about it. It's always guaranteed. When you go against your little voice, it's always true. It's so.
I'm thinking that the fish conversation could be
Yeah.
fairly lengthy. Maybe we jump into that.
Sure.
and get
I agree.
Yeah, so I think Ian's also covering for Dr. Webster.
Oh.
Oh.
Dr. Webster.
Oh, really? Yep. Well, yeah, I don't think that we're going to get anything too heavy if we just do season dates for now while we're waiting. Better use of time. We got a
Okay.
shorter meeting anyways.
Sounds good. Thank
Wait.
you.
It's 4:10. No matter what we do with Ian, it's going to go over that 5 o'clock cutoff. So, yeah, I guess we could open it to opening dates. Sure, we open the floor to opening dates. Anybody got any proposals?
Carl.
I'm sure some do. Anyone? Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Anybody but Carl.
We could throw some
Kidding.
a motion out there for some dates and then have a discussion around it.
I have a motion.
Go ahead,
So
Peggy.
just to start the discussion, Hannah's start and end dates, and please correct me if I'm wrong, was March 10th. Thank you. And closing on October 31st. Both are Saturdays, I believe.
No. I think it was based on the tide, that's why the 10th was picked.
Yeah, I think that's right. So 10th to the 31st.
I think at 2C, the peak of the tides was around what, 12, 13 or something like that. We're trying to get some flatter tides before we got into the big tides. And if we got into the big tides, we wanted to push it back to the 15th or something where they're coming down again. That's what the tide book's telling us.
We'll get a second for her motion and then we can.
Oh,
open up
yeah.
For discussion.
Oh, just get on the table. Yeah, someone want a second, March 10th, October
Yeah.
31st, Susan?
Thank you for the second, Susan. And I'm just going to leave the floor open since that was a for discussion motion.
Perfect.
Okay, it's open for discussion.
Nick?
I don't think one starting on March 10th is never very, you don't want to start on Monday, 'cause we're going to be getting that fish over the weekend. That's not ideal for a commercial. So one, we've always done Saturday or Friday. I actually kind of like Fridays, but really I'm ambivalent to whether we do Friday the 8th, or sorry, Friday the 7th or Saturday the 8th. And then, I mean, we already have a problem catching all of our quota anyways. So October 31st doesn't really make much sense to me either. So I feel like early December, we should be shutting her down again. You know, I understand the points with if they're spawning, but you know, that could be one area. We don't really know enough about spawning, when they're spawning, where they're spawning. So, and again, if a pound is a pound, right? So if you take that fish out in June, you can't get him out in November if he's about to spawn. Maybe they're spawning and then you pluck them. You just don't know, right? So that science, it's just anecdotal at this point. So I would propose a longer season date as opposed to Halloween. That's my feeling.
So you said March 7th to December something?
December 6th is a Saturday.
Okay.
Go ahead, Greg.
Thanks. I would stick with October 31st. I think Kit on the Hannah call maybe even said November 1st. We can't afford to keep our plants open into December for one or two fisheries. It's not financially viable for us. So I'd be a proponent for a shorter season.
Yeah, Greg, thanks for that. I don't think you have to close or open your plant. If you want to close your plant, you tell your fishermen, hey, we're closed. And you guys have plants all over Western Alaska. You guys aren't going to be buying, you might be the only person in town, right? But there are a lot of fishermen, there are a lot of ports that do want a little bit extra time to take that fish out of the water, right? And like I said, in BC, we were one of the only areas to actually catch close to their quota. A lot of the other areas, they're leaving it all in the water. So I think people need time to get the quota out. I mean, the quota is a different discussion, but guys, like, fishing's not good out there. The boats need a lot of time to get the fish out.
Go ahead, Carl.
I just think with the longer season, it gives people a false sense of time that they can go out and catch it later, and then weather moves in and it basically stops them. So, I mean, November was pretty bad across the board for fishing this year. I don't think there was much activity. And then once there's not a lot of activity out there, you know, the market seems to shrink as well, just with Thanksgiving. And then it's not on people's minds to buy halibut anymore. They've already shifted. So I'm in favor of a shorter season just to keep it more condensed and fluid to keep the market open. I mean, I'd like that 31st of October, November 1st close, or even traditionally where we were at with November 7th. Just beyond that, I just see the market fall off. And then, you know, I could go with a later start as well, just with effort. Yeah.
See, I think a lot of the Alaska processors are facing higher overheads and higher production costs and wanting to close their plants down when they're not busy. And I think that's fine. That's their business. But I don't think that because I'm not open, I don't want you open is an argument that holds any water with me. I mean, that's just like kids in the schoolyard saying, if I can't buy, I don't want you buying. And that's the only logic behind it. It doesn't make any sense. What Carl said about the late season, we purposely took a couple of our bigger boats and sent them out in November because there wasn't much effort there, and we got a higher price than we did at the opening for that fish. So the market was hungry. There wasn't much fish coming in, spread the production out. The biggest thing that hurts all of us buyers is when everybody has a big clump come in and we flood the fresh market, and we're either into our secondary markets or we're freezing. And I mean, the longer you can spread that production out, even if it's a couple 100,000 pounds coming in November, it's a couple 100,000 pounds, doesn't come in March and doesn't come in at the end of August when all the fish comes hammering in. Other than if you don't want it open because I'm not open, I think that you should consider some support for leaving it open longer. And now in BC, then we've got Blackcod and ZN, the rockfish guys are all open. They're catching fish when they're not allowed to keep it. They have to lease expensive quota. Leasing's ridiculous in BC. These guys are paying high prices for leases and bringing in fish they have to cover with quota and throwing it out. So the shorter the season is, the more that goes on. We got Blackcod boats out right now that are catching halibut that is a discard that we have to cover with halibut quota. So I feel strongly that a longer season helps us and avoids those peaks. Anyways, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I think Liam might help me on this one, but I'm pretty sure we had 8 or 9 boats out on December 5th, the last day of the season in Rosswood. Maybe had a boat or 2 out there too. So there was guys fishing hard right up to the last day of the season to get it out of the water, or they would have been stuck paying $650 lease on 30,000 pounds. And these guys had to get them out of their boats. So you shorten the season, these owner operators, you might sink them in my mind.
Well, that brings up a whole nother side of the conversation, and it was probably not an intentional phrase, but you threw out sinking. We also talk about the safety aspect of it, and we bring up the Windwalker accident. Those guys, tragedy. Those guys were racing the clock to get their fish haul before the end of the season. They were out there in weather that they shouldn't have been. You know, there were multiple instances in the fall with very close calls that could have been tragic, and there was one that was really tragic. So safety is a consideration, and something that we should be thinking about when we're deciding this. SBC's in the boat of a shorter season. It's, our biggest challenge, it's not so much a competition issue, Bruce, for us. It's, we're really challenged in our labor capacities. We've lost the majority of our local labor. All of our labor comes in from outside. Those people are there at the beginning of March. They're ready to go home. Like, we close up the plant in Thanksgiving and we're empty. We're running on a very short staff just to do maintenance projects. And I know that's not any of your problems, but it's a concern for us. And to keep those people around, even if they were willing, for the handful of trips that may or may not come in is it's not cost effective. It just doesn't work. So we would want a shorter season.
Go ahead, Keith.
Mark, what's the Atlantic halibut season?
Year round.
There is no season other than it's open year round.
It's
It's
year
closed for one day at the end of March, and it starts again in April. That's when the quotas start. I'm sorry?
You said my Alaskans going to go to. Just one round.
And that's become a big part. That quota is going to be going up potentially to 7,000 metric tons this year.
My question was, and do you see a lot of that fish, you guys from the East Coast coming to the West Coast?
Absolutely. Because they're a lot larger. Their average size is in the 30s to 40s, like we used to have in Alaska all the time. And people are willing to use it. So
realistically speaking, shorter season makes sense. He's got it covered year round, then I know that going all the way into December, like you mentioned, the Windwalker, that was a real problem. Just those guys are racing to get it, and it was too late. It's terrible.
And that was a basic idea of IFQs when we started talking about this 40 years ago: safety and economics. And both of them have worked very, very well. And if anybody is fishing at a time where they should not be, they're foolish. It's not like the old Derby days, 3 days in May, 3 days in June, 3 days in September if you needed it. How many people did we lose with 18,000 people out fishing? It was ridiculous.
All the time.
It was ridiculous.
That was dangerous.
And
for
that's,
sure.
that's the number one thing is the safety factor.
Susan?
I have a question. When we were initially talking, we were talking tide-based start dates and end dates. So we're not looking at the tide, or is that important?
Oh, we'll always look at the tide. I
But
mean,
no,
that's-
should we look at that before, and then look at our start dates? Because I thought that's why we initially
well,
looked at
yeah,
that.
we can do that. I think that we kind of want to get a ballpark idea of what those dates are, and then we can worry about.
I think we're at higher elevation than
Yeah.
tides right now still. We're a
at the
month off.
30,000 foot view right now.
Exactly. So we heard safety, but we heard your people, which is your production cost, which isn't, like you can close your plant. That's fine. If you can't get people and you close down, does that mean you don't want me to buy either?
No, I said that. It's not a competition.
You'll have a market advantage. No, doesn't matter.
It is pretty challenging having that conversation with the fishermen of why are they buying and you're not.
It is. Yeah, for sure.
Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I like that March 10th date. For a closing date, I don't know what the right date is, but it certainly feels like October 31st is the wrong date. I mean, just one more anecdotal thing to add is for us anyway, in our experience, no one wants to be fishing in November. No one wants to be fishing in December. But the reality is things go wrong, every year we got people fishing in that time window and they're doing it because there's breakdowns, death of a loved one or something happening wrong. By closing the season earlier than it needs to be, it just feels like you're kind of twisting the knife on those guys that already are kind of down and out, so just
Greg,
something I wanted to add.
That's a good point. You could back me up on this. I think that more of a reasoning for that is blackcod. Guys are chasing blackcod hard because they're not getting it all caught. And so they're concentrating and letting the halibut wait until fall. And then all of a sudden they're hard to catch and the weather's bad. So I think that's also a big component of what's going on.
I don't know how many blackcod boats are hailed out in BC right now, but there's probably 5 or 6 fishing blackcod right now, and they're catching halibut. And, that supports a longer season than for us. 5 out right
here,
now.
Ian.
What are your thoughts,
We will not
Liam?
get quite yet. That's beautiful.
Depends what the quota is.
Pardon?
Depends what the quota will be. But I would say it's up to the fishermen to decide when they want to fish. And it's up to the processors to be able to process and sell the fish. So whatever's best for the resource, first and foremost, once that's established, then the fishermen work with their processors to decide how is the best way to sell the fish to maximize profit.
Well, what's best for the resource is the question that remains to be answered. We're still trying to figure out whether we should be fishing on spawning stocks or not.
And that's exactly it. The resource is the first priority here. So
I agree.
That's something we have to remember.
An interesting point, I might run out as soon as I say this, but in Atlantic Canada, their quota is going up crazy. They have a 365-day year fishery. We do not, and our quota is going down. So could a 365-day fishery be somewhat better for the stock? And again, I'm going to be leaving right now. But,
Good idea.
He said 360.
360. Okay, we can do 364. But it is an interesting thought. Like, how is their fishery doing so much better than ours, and they're open all year round? So clearly, the spawning during the year.
Down 40 years ago, and they let that Bruce.
They still have lots of draggers over there.
Oh, now they do, but that's what they did for the last 30 years. They've been growing.
Well, one of the issues with the East Coast is that there's not an IPHC. And each province is run by the Minister of Fisheries. And to ask them a point blank question. Maybe they don't understand me because I'm from Boston, but maybe you can talk to them, Nick, in the Canadian accent and ask them what's going on. You will not get a straight answer from them at all.
Actually,
Well, that's my point. They're just not letting people know exactly what the quota is. And they found new areas off Labrador and the island and things like that. And they're finding more and more and more. And it's crazy. There's only 200,000 pounds of East Coast halibut quota for the United States because they gave it up gave up the Grand Banks and everything else that went with that. So it's kind of ridiculous. So there are people fighting to get some U.S. quota back from that, but I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I'm sorry? There you go. That's a good point. That's a good point.
He
Well,
knew as a state first.
yeah, you're going to be the 51st state. Maybe we'll have better control after
So
that. I don't know.
the East Coast halibut quota is managed by Landmark and it's going up. The Canadian West Coast black cod is also managed by Landmark and that quota is going up as well. So it's pretty well managed fishery and they actually do the South Pacific tuna quotas as well, which I don't know much about. It's you can't question the science of what they're doing out there right now. I think it's better than DFO science from what I've been able to see. Just interesting. It's a third party consultant doing the stock assessment.
But getting the data from them is very, very difficult. I mean, you really have to break the bank to do it, or the safe, as it were. So it's frustrating.
Excuse me, Mark. Is there a lot of draggers back east now, or they've been shut down for 40 years and that's why they're able to grow?
Yeah.
That's basically the main reason.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of draggers at all. And the cod's gone. And then they found crab, and then all of a sudden they found halibut. So that's what's going on. Yeah.
Anyways, we're getting off topic.
Deliveries in November 1st and just like that last month.
No, it's just, no. Maybe a couple guys, little, small boats that partied all summer, right? And then they're ready to, now we better go catch fish, right? And, it's never a big.
So do you care if it's open or closed then?
I don't care. I'd rather be shot.
Why should any?
Yeah, you go surfing, yeah.
So I haven't heard a good reason for anybody that wants it closed, except that they don't want to be bothered with it. Is that a good enough reason to argue for your date?
I have a question for the Canadian side. You guys go.
Put the mic.
He doesn't have one.
I don't have one. I'm a
Use that.
I'm a newbie.
For online, they can't hear you.
Oh, online. My question is, so that last month, let's say November, I'm not either way. December, you got bigger boats, but do you, how much fish do you guys harvest between November, the last month there, do you think? I mean, that'd be one way to look at it, is this, how many guys are putting an effort in November? You know what I'm saying? How much fish do you take in November out of your?
500,000 pounds,
For sure.
something like that, I would think.
Positively, that month, that's a lot.
It is a lot.
Okay, well, then I stand corrected. I wouldn't imagine that.
It
that's a lot.
depends. It depends. Like, the effort fishing in December this year, I think the weather was fishable earlier in November. Guys wouldn't have been out, but I also think guys left it thinking that they had time to go fish, and then they're run up against the clock. Like, they could have been out earlier in October. They just thought, no, we have a couple more months left. So I know, Bruce, back to your point of, I haven't heard a good reason. I mean, I think we all as plants and processors individually have our own agenda. And if costs and overhead are through the roof waiting for that 3,000 pound delivery in December, yes, we have the idea that, we have the option to close or not, depending how it goes. But, our economics make more sense when fish comes in a steadier flow to control costs. And that's trucking. It's not just plant operations, it's trucking, it's the logistics of everything as well. So, looking at that aspect of it, that's why a more condensed, shorter season, especially with the quota looking like it's going down, that makes more sense for us.
Well, we're tasked with coming back to the commissioners with
Right.
some dates. And in my experience,
Hello.
usually what comes out of this room
Hi, hold on just
is
a
not
second.
even close to what we end up at. There's a lot more people speaking in that conference board to this.
Yeah.
So probably, but we do have to make a decision. So we have a motion and we have a second on March 10th and October 31st. We can take a vote. If it passes, it passes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Then we'll just get another motion.
Sure.
Tyler.
Okay.
I'm not necessarily saying I have a preference either way, but should we vote independently on the start date and then on the close date, or is it total package?
We could do that.
It's a good idea.
I got no opinion either way. Just
It would offer a friendly amendment, yes.
okay. I'd offer a friendly amendment to
Vote on the
separate those.
Opening and date separately.
I
Yeah.
accept that.
Thank you, Peggy.
Great.
Peggy accepts. So 2 votes or 2 motions.
Just got one question. Why don't we just meet in the middle and say November 15th and everybody won?
We don't want November 15th. Good idea, though.
Point of order.
Go ahead, Peggy.
So forgive me, you're a huge contribution to this, but are you a voting member?
No, sorry.
That's okay. I just wanted to clarify that, but don't stop giving us your opinion. So I'm happy to have any one of these replace my motion. So, Mr. Chairman, it's kind of up to you to,
You want to make a motion for an opening date, and we'll just do that one first.
I've already got a
She's
motion
done
on the
that.
floor.
Yep.
And I'm
Sure.
happy to accept
Sure.
an amended motion,
Accept that.
amended motion,
Right,
which Tyler has given us.
right.
Did you give us both dates?
I did not. I mean, I would be willing to declare March 10th as the starting date, but I don't know what to put for a closing date.
2 motions. We're just doing a motion on an opening date. Is that okay with you, Peggy?
Yeah, she did say.
She did, but then so did you agree to amend the motion to not have an end date? You would just have a motion for a starting date? It sounds like you said that. Did you say that? And have 2 motions?
Yes, I would agree to amend my motion to only be the starting date and eliminate the closing date, and someone else can start for the
Somebody
closing date.
second that? And your March 10th is your opening date that you move? Okay.
So have Greg Enderlin seconded that.
Greg seconded. Okay, so we click.
Oh, the clicker.
We get to click. It's your moment, Tyler.
Okay, voting's open. March 10th opening day.
Hear me? And then you guys can close it.
Thanks, Susan. So I guess we don't all know who's in and who's out. If you, when those 5, those are the ones that aren't voting. Tyler? Pardon? Yeah, there's 5 not voting. Is that the ones? And Heather?
This is Robert Tynes. Can you hear me?
I'm relaying Heather's vote over here.
Okay.
Oh, you're Heather's. Oh, okay, great.
I'm relaying, I'm not providing any.
Oh. Thanks, Jim.
Okay, I'm gonna close the vote.
Smart man.
Okay, voting's closed, guys.
Okay, March 10th.
11/6.
Somebody want to propose a closing date?
Carl?
I'll go with November 15th to be diplomatic.
Go ahead, Greg. You second?
I second.
Greg seconds. Okay. Any discussion? November? December 15th, he said.
No.
November 15th.
So you got a second? on that?
Okay, Greg second. Okay, click away.
Hold on, click.
Oh, hold it.
Nope, working on it.
Takes 1 second.
Don't click.
I'd say citing safety issues. No, because they'll.
Just click.
Don't worry about it.
I don't agree with you.
Whoop.
Kenny.
Oh no.
I think the same 5 are done, so we're done. So voting's closed, except Heather. Oh, you do it for here, Jim?
Yeah.
Okay. 11. All right. Here we go. Okay. So we've got 20 minutes left and we have Dr. Stewart here.
We can easily burn up 20 minutes.
We can't finish with you in 20 minutes, so I don't know what that looks like, Ian.
Yeah.
Maybe down with that empty one there, Ian, if that's okay. Give you some space.
I can't grab him.
Yeah. Can't shush them. So we can carry on with you in the morning when we start up, Ian. Is that okay? Please, Dr. Stewart?
Does it work?
I guess it does. Okay. Don't know why there's tape over it. Okay, thanks.
Just tell me which.
So I can definitely come back in the morning as needed, or
We'll
first
need you-
first thing or later in the day. I'll be available. The conference board, I had at least an hour in there, so. I wasn't intending to go through and actually give you another formal presentation. You've heard a lot from me already in the last couple of days, so I think it'd be more efficient to just go right into questions if that works for you. Unless there's something you want me to start on. And I should say, I can speak to the assessment and the projections, but given that I'm filling in for Dr. Webster, I can also answer questions about the setline survey as well.
Okay.
Nick?
So doctor, just a question. What are the advantages, disadvantages if we were ever to think of a year-round fishery?
Yeah, so I got the similar question in the conference board, and I would say there's 3 things to think about. The first is that the original winter closure was put into place in a time when they were essentially trying to limit the effort in the fishery. The fishery was an effort-controlled fishery, and that there wasn't necessarily an overall mortality limit. They were trying to reduce the overall catch by putting in a closed season. There were also some economic factors even at that time. On that vein, if we think about fisheries where the goal is to have the fish spawn and then catch it because we want the reproductive output of that fish in that year, these are generally fisheries like herring and squid and things that really high turnover. If we're in a case where it matters whether that fish spawns before or after we catch it, we're fishing way too hard on Pacific halibut. So that concern really is something I don't think we should be worried about for Pacific halibut. In now that we are setting catch limits, when exactly we take the catch out of the calendar year probably doesn't have a huge effect. However, there is an uncertainty there, which is that we've never really fished on the halibut stock in the wintertime. And so there is the potential for some sort of direct biological disturbance going on. So if we were to fish extensively on all the major spawning aggregations, it is possible that we could disrupt spawning to some degree. It's an unknown, and I can't tell you how much risk is associated with that because we don't really have any experience with that in the halibut fishery. It's always been closed in the winter, essentially. But there's some evidence from some other species. I believe there's at least one cod study showing that heavy fishing on a spawning aggregation can actually disperse those fish to some degree. So I think those would be the considerations beyond, you know, safety and some of the other things you guys have already talked about. Those would be the biological considerations associated with a year-round season.
So just to build on that, would fishing it now, disrupting that model now at our low point, would that be wise?
You know, adding an additional risk, we have the risks of being at a low stock size. We have the risks that we have challenge quantifying, such as the change in fishery CPUE and the potential for bias in the survey. I guess there's a case to be made that we have enough unquantified risks at the moment. But because we don't have any direct biological observations of fishing interacting with halibut spawning, it's really hard to say whether that's an appreciable risk or not. But I would say in general, it's not so much a concern about the catch and when we take the catch out, because these days we set a mortality limit. We're going to catch those fish, whether we catch those pounds in the summer or the fall or the winter. It has some implication on where the fish are going to be caught. And we have, over the last couple of decades, with the advent of satellite tagging, we've learned a lot about when these fish arrive and leave on the spawning grounds. And we used to think that if we didn't touch them in the winter, they would be in the same place all year. And I think our emerging understanding is that these fish are migrating well into the spring, and they're starting their return migration to the spawning grounds even in the early fall. And so we may be catching fish, particularly, for example, I'll use Region 2 as an example because we have direct satellite tagging. These fish are leaving, they're feeding in the summer as far south as Puget Sound, and those fish may be spawning in 2C or even farther north in the wintertime, and they may be making that transit during the year. So in terms of whose fish are whose and where they're going to be caught, fishing in the early spring and late fall certainly has the potential to have fish be accessible to fisheries in multiple areas.
That's a great answer.
Thanks, Dr. X, Ian, Dr. Stewart. Too many doctors in the house. I'm an old guy. Bruce probably remembers this. I find it's interesting that how things change, that we have the Canadian contingent pushing for a year-round season, and most of us, the U.S., not all, pushing back. And when we first originally started having this conversation, it was coming more from the westward fishing groups about a year-round fishery. And the big challenge at the time was just what you brought up, the transboundary issues with those northern BC fish moving into 2C and 3A to spawn. And that was a real challenge, and that's why the conversation pretty much ended. So a little history there.
That's another interesting question, talking about what we've been talking about, what Norm just said. What about these Amendment 80 guys up in 4CDE? They're fishing around they're fishing when it's closed and bycatching when it's closed. And how does that work? Like, how are they? Their TAC is year round, I would assume, is it not? So the directed fishery guys are opened and closed in Amendment 80's 365 days.
There are openings and closings for various different fisheries in Alaska. I don't think any one fishery is necessarily open 365 days, but there is certainly year-round fishing activity in, I think, in all the regulatory areas. Whether it's trawling or fixed gear, there's somebody's fishing out there all the time, everywhere, essentially.
There's a comment on the line. Oh, Kit has a comment. How important is it to have an off period to compile data to ensure we have science data analyzed before decisions are made? There's Moses in the way.
Yeah, about
before decisions are made about harvest for the next year.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Kit. And we never rest at the commission, but it is nice to have a brief period where there's not new information coming in. There's two parts to this. The first part is for the stock assessment. The closer I can get to the end of the season, the more complete the data sets are going to be. So we're processing logbooks, we're reading otoliths, and we do that right up until the last minute before the stock assessment, literally days before I'm running the final numbers. But in the last few years, we've had another 5 or 6 weeks of fishing after that. And so that means that the data sets are less complete. So the shorter the season, the more complete the data sets, the better the preliminary estimates will be in the stock assessment. There's definitely that. The other side of that is that our port sampling program, if you heard the FAC and some of the discussion on the floor, there's some budget challenges in the port sampling as well. And the longer the fishery goes, the more that we have to staff those ports later and later into the season. As you guys know, we weren't able to staff every port late in the season. And apologize, Greg, we never staff Kodiak or Yakutat these days, but that is an additional expense. So that extra 5 weeks from early November, where it used to be 10 years ago, to mid-December or early December, that has actually added appreciably to the costs of our port sampling program. So it's kind of a double-edged thing, both in terms of how we use the data and our ability to collect it. And I would say that given some of the budget discussions, it's possible that even if the season does go long, we would have to cut the season short, at least for some of our port samplers again.
Okay.
I have a question. What can we do as processors for you to help you get the data, the logbooks? If you said that was a constraint, since we're the one landing the fish, what can we do to help you?
Thanks for the question. I guess it's too bad Monica's in the conference board. She's more in tune with the day-to-day operations. I mean, I know we rely heavily on you all to provide us access to the fishermen as the offloads are occurring. That's really the primary thing, is if we can get access to those, without disrupting the plant operations, to be able to sample those fish. In terms of the logbooks, with the change in regulation, we should get those logbooks sooner or later. The real benefit, and I've had this question of, well, can't we just wait till the end of the season and get the logbooks mailed in, because people are supposed to mail them in? Our port samplers, you all have probably seen them on the dock. They go through a whole interview process when the skipper comes in, and they catch a lot of errors in the logbooks. Not errors, but sometimes errors and sometimes things that just can be clarified. They catch that when they do the interview on the spot, and without that ability to do the interview, just getting it in the mail, we can't really. The data are not as high quality. So I don't know that I could really make a specific ask in terms of on the logbook side, but just facilitating our access to collect the biological samples, either providing a station or making sure that we have access to the flow of fish somewhere between when they're getting offloaded from the boat and before they start getting headed and processed. That's really the key piece from you all.
Dr. Stewart, we've had multiple comments in here about what are the hazards of fishing on, or not of fishing on, spawning biomass. Do you have an idea of how we develop that information? How can we get there? How can we tell?
In terms of fishing in the winter, or the fish targeting the spawning aggregation? Targeting the spawning aggregation, yes. The commission has we've done some studies, some winter studies, usually for other purposes, to collect, information, for example, for the genetic sampling that we did recently. So we have some studies that we've done in the winter. I guess there could be more data analysis of some of those historical studies to try and understand better, if we were fishing on the spawning aggregations, would it lead to a different demographic in the catch? I mean, we know that we catch roughly 80 to 85% females in the standard fishery catch. It's possible that could be different in the winter. I could even imagine a case where it goes the other direction, that if we fished, particularly on the early side of the spawning aggregations, we would expect more males to be on the spawning grounds first. And it might be an opportunity to access more larger males. I don't really know which direction that would go, but it's possible that the commission could dig through some of those earlier studies and try to better understand what might be different about fishing on spawning aggregations than not. Short of that, we'd actually have to try the experiment. We'd have to open up some fishing in the winter and try it and see what we got, and see whether it would really differ from what we see in the spring, fall, and summer.
I know some folks that might appreciate that opportunity.
Good idea. Good idea.
Thank you.
Nick.
Yeah, Dr. Stewart, if you were sitting where we're sitting, what's a TCEY you would be comfortable with for next year, knowing that it doesn't look rosy and we want to be stewards of the resource?
I'm glad I'm not sitting in your seat. I really, if it were as easy as the science, it would be a lot easier, but I really can't say what the right TCEY for the commission is. The decision table reflects the probabilities of further stock decrease and various other risks, but what's the right risk for the commission is a tough question. Sorry to not answer your question.
Go ahead, Peggy.
That's okay. We'll keep asking questions like that. Mine is, we've heard a lot of compelling speeches about protecting the stock. And one of them came from Commissioner Curlin. He asked the U.S. Delegation last night, really think hard if you think 10% drop is going to do anything to help this stock. He put it better than that, but that was basically in our question. And it seems kind of obvious to me that that's not enough, but I don't have that much skin in the game, so I'm more looking at it from a distance. And I'm trying to get at the numbers that are going to help make this decision. And I'm caught between my gut feeling that much lower removals from the directed fishery would ease up conditions for the rest of the spawning biomass to expand, and really quite the opposite, that the risk tables are telling us that it's going to be move up to 11%. That 11% increase, it's an increase to 11% of the spawning biomass has a risk of, help me out here, getting smaller in 1 year, I think. And that means that there's a 89% chance that it won't. And if I were betting on anything, I would go with the 89%, not the 11. So I have this definite feeling that I'm not getting the whole statistical picture there, though. So that's why I'm asking the question, is there any way we can sort of sort through that noise on the radar screen and help us see what's a real important signal for us to respond to here, sort of between faith and math?
Yeah. So a couple comments on that. I guess that looking at the probabilities in the decision table is going to give us a good sense of, you know, if we take this action, what's the chance that the stock's going to go down further from where it is now? What degree of risk that corresponds to, I think, is going to be up to everybody in the room to decide. I have tried to outline in the various presentations that there are some risks that are outside the decision table, and those are related to the current state of the stock. Because we are at what's probably close to or at the historical low spawning biomass, we're sort of entering uncharted territory there. And it's not necessarily mean that we're going to fall off the map, but it means that we haven't tried this biomass before to see what's going to happen. For everything that we understand about the recruitment dynamics, a reduction this year and next year is unlikely to have a big effect on recruitment in the next few years. The recruitment appears to be largely driven by environmental conditions and the ability to have eggs in the right place at the right time to hit the right conditions, basically the jackpot for recruitment. And we are probably going to have enough spawning biomass, regardless of the decisions of the next couple of years, to still win that recruitment lottery if the conditions allow it. So I wouldn't say that taking a cut isn't necessarily going to improve the situation with regard to recruitment. We really are waiting for another good recruitment to come along to help bring the stock up. The backside of that coin is that if we are in a new productivity regime that's going to last for a while, this is the spawning biomass that we've got, and we're unlikely to see at this level of recruitment, we're unlikely to see enough productivity to substantially improve the spawning biomass. So I think it's a question of, are you sort of happy to just putter along at this relatively low spawning biomass, because that's where we are unless we get another good recruitment. That's likely to last for quite a few years. So the potential benefits of taking a cut now or in the relatively near future are that we have two relatively young year classes in the water, And so those year classes still have lots of growth and maturity to go. And in that regard, we're not foregoing yield. If we were fishing on really old fish and we didn't catch them, well, some of them are going to die off. And we're basically, you either catch it or you lose it. We're not in that situation right now. We're with these young year classes in the water. If we catch them now or we catch them in a few years, there's going to be almost as many fish, and they're going to be larger and more mature, and they're going to, on a per fish basis, they're going to produce more yield. So in that regard, we're kind of in a new situation here at this low stock size in terms of the potential for that yield to kind of carry over into the future if we don't catch it right now. So that's certainly one consideration.
I've got a question for you. It seems like everyone who asks a question has an answer they hope you're going to make, and they ask it and wait and hope that you say what they want you to. But I feel like for a few years in this meetings, we kind of got to the end of the road on the decision, and then everybody went, well, I think I saw some 8 and 9-year-olds, and I think we were seeing didn't we see a bit of a hint of recruitment here? We kind of hung on to that for 3 or 4 years and didn't take a big cut. It didn't work, and they weren't showing up. And now we're saying, well, we've reduced the fish. Then we were saying, well, even if we don't fish, it's going to go down anyways, so why take a cut, And then I think we're even giving up on that one now. And now we're saying that doesn't make sense. Let's just make a cut. And in the same year, I feel the sentiment in the room changing more to that. Now we've got unreliable fish data, and we're trying to figure out how to weigh fishing data in the model, and we're seeing a broader spectrum of probability going forward, which gives us a higher risk factor of decline. So it feels like we're changing the narrative to say what we wanted to say almost, like how you've changed how much you weigh the fishing data in, and then who decides how to weigh all those into this model when you come up with your thing? It seems a bit subjective. I'm sure it is, but.
Yeah, thanks for the observation. That's a pretty fair characterization, I think, of where we are at the moment. In terms of the strictly the weights on the fishery versus the survey, that comes in through the estimate of the variance of those. So it's essentially the more uncertain we are, the less weight it gets in the model. And we're definitely paying the price of these reduced surveys in the last several years. So I don't have to subjectively choose the weighting on each of those sources as the fishery independent setline survey becomes more uncertain. The models just rely more heavily on the fishery data. You can imagine in the extreme, if I just took the survey data out entirely, there'd only be the fishery data, and all the weight would be on that. So that inherently comes out of these models. I will say that this is not a problem that's going to disappear next year. When we come back next year, even if we successfully complete all the 2025 design, including the 4A and 4B stations, we're only going to just be chipping away at this backlog of uncertainty we have in the survey. It's going to take 2 or 3 years of a much more comprehensive survey to catch up. And so we're going to be right back here with these uncertainties next year. I'm almost certain.
Which leads us to take a lower catch because of the broad spectrum of certainty, right?
Perhaps.
No. Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, I think just with the years past, the confliction was our guys going out that were fishing saw better results than what the fish was providing.
Mm-hmm.
And then now it's completely flipped where guys aren't blocking out in 2 trips and they're needing 3 or 4 to catch their blocks. And they're saying it's worse than what the fishery data is. So I think that's what the confliction is with what we're wrestling with now.
Yeah.
She's probably listening to us.
Come in, Heather. Hasn't been the same without Heather. Heather's personal meeting.
Hello, sweetie. We're gonna put you on the mic.
Yeah, you're live.
Okay, I don't even know where you are in the meeting now because I just lost you again just a few minutes ago. But I was going to ask Ian a question. Is that still appropriate?
Yes.
Okay, super. Thank you. Ian, I know this is kind of a philosophical question, but when Dr. Hicks was speaking earlier, he had a line on one of the slides that said, no conservation concern. And I've heard that before, and I've heard it from, I think, both you and Alan. And I'm wondering what exactly that means, because we're also hearing, of course, that others have conservation concerns. I don't know how we determine that. Well, I do know how some people determine it, but I don't know how Dr. Hicks is determining it, and I couldn't really speak when he was on. So maybe you could help us understand that, help me understand that. What's the criteria?
I'm not sure exactly which slide you're referring to from Dr. Hicks, but I can say in general that when I'm referring to a conservation concern in the context of the assessment, I'm generally speaking about where the stock is with regard to our SB 30% threshold and our SB 20% limit. And those, unfortunately or fortunately, are not magic numbers. Those are numbers that are used globally across many fisheries. Essentially, if you fish your stock down to less than a third of what you would have had if you weren't fishing, generally recognized around the world, you're fishing pretty hard. And if you fish it down to less than a fifth of what you had when you weren't fishing, that's generally considered an overfishing limit. That you basically you're now in the conservation zone. That those, and it's again, it's not specific to halibut. We thankfully have not really been there for Pacific halibut, so we don't know what the consequences are exactly of going to a biomass level that low. But those are just generally accepted practice around the world, that if you get down below a third, and especially below a fifth of what you might see in the absence of fishing, that's recognized as the conservation zone, a place that you'd want to start ratcheting back on your fishing. And I suspect that's probably was the reference that Dr. Hicks was making as well.
So is there a term for moving in the direction of a conservation concern? I understand that you have different measures and so forth, but is it a conservation concern in kind of a broader sense if you can see that the stock is moving in the direction, a lower direction, and is getting closer and closer to that sort of guideline point? Is that a concern on a broader scale?
Yes. So most fisheries have what we'd call a harvest control rule, where you would start to reduce fishing intensity as you approach that limit. You wouldn't just come screaming right up to the limit and then decide there was a problem. And so in the case of halibut, our sort of historical or interim management procedure that we've been mostly operating under in recent decades suggests that when we get down to 30%, below 30%, we would start to reduce the target level of fishing intensity. And if we got to 20, we would basically say, we need to put the full brakes on the fishery at 20. And so that would be the precautionary zone. I'll note that that's a pretty steep harvest control rule. Many fisheries operate on something, instead of starting at 30% and going to 20, many fisheries operate on something that might start at 40% and go down to 10%, for example. And so they are, instead of fishing all the way down to 30 and then taking a very large change, those fisheries, when they got below 40%, would start to reduce the fishing intensity in hopes that they never got down that low. So the shape of those control rules definitely varies across fisheries, and ours is pretty steep. As it was historically formulated, we wouldn't really change our approach until we got down to a pretty low biomass, and then we would change it pretty rapidly at even lower biomass than that.
And some people think that we collectively are all getting there more quickly than they're comfortable with. But we are looking at the scientists and we're sort of trying to ask it a bunch of different ways. And I know people have already asked you, what do you think? But when the scientists say there's no conservation concern, then people are sort of floundering because they're hearing all these concerns from the grounds and from others, but they're not hearing it from the Secretariat. They're not hearing it from you guys. And so I think obviously that's why people keep asking you, what would you do? And I know you're not going to answer that. I understand that. But anyway, I feel like there needs to be a different kind of scale that somehow gives people a little bit better idea. And I'm not talking about the ones you already have, where you're talking about possibilities of getting lower, in any given year at a certain level of harvest, but something that's sort of broader that could give you kind of red light, green light, yellow light, maybe that kind of thing. Is there anything like that that could be done that's a little bit easier to understand?
Yes, and I'm certainly sympathetic to the fact that we have some mixed messages in the information, and that's unfortunately that's the reality, is that we don't see a strong relationship, for example, between the spawning biomass and subsequent recruitment. If we did, then I could tell you when we were getting low, this is the level at which we would expect to see compromised recruitment, but we've not seen that historically. And so instead of being able to tell you where the threshold is, all I can tell you is that the spawning biomass in an absolute sense is now at or perhaps lower than we've seen historically. And in that regard, we are entering a new, let's call it an experiment, where we don't know how the stock is necessarily going to respond at this level. So that's where I can't say it's a conservation concern, but it's certainly an unquantified risk that we're at a biomass that we've not observed previously. So maybe that would be a path forward, Heather, would be to continue to use the reference points that we have now, but also maybe try to quantify some of these other considerations. The challenge there is that, we won't know if we've driven the stock low enough to compromise recruitment effectively until we do it. And I don't think that's necessary. And then, yes, and that's not necessarily a test that we want to exert on the stock.
Right. That's what I'm worried about. And I think that's what a lot of people are worried about. And I'm just trying to figure out how we can do better in knowing that. And it sounds like your predictive capabilities are sort of limited and getting more and more limited, perhaps by less and less data.
Yes, unfortunately they are. I mean, there's the biological uncertainty, and then there's this additional whole layer of having essentially compromised survey information for the last couple of years. And so and that's going to continue for the next several years as well. I mentioned that earlier. Even with the 2025 survey design, that's only going to chip away a little bit at this backlog of areas that we haven't sampled.
Yes, I think we noted that during the presentations earlier. So if there is an absence of resources to do what needs to be done, that's an answer that you can't give either. What do you do? A bunch of us tried to get some money from the feds, and we did, and then the Canadians are chipping in a little bit. So that's all good, but it's not enough. And so when do you say we can't do what you want us to do with what you're giving us for tools, for resources? When is that? When do you say that?
I would say we were pretty close this year. The 2024 survey design was pretty sparse. Much more sparse than that, and we're going to start to see multiple biological regions where, like as I did for 4B this year, I basically have said I can't tell you what the trend in 4B is. And if we get much more sparse in the design, we're going to start to see even the core of the stock. It's going to be very difficult to tell you what the trend may or may not be in the core of the stock. The space-time model is good at filling in gaps in the survey design, but not when there's more gaps than there are data.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ian. Yeah, it's not a pretty picture, but thank you.
And just as a follow-up, I don't want to be too pessimistic in that the 2025 survey design is an improvement over 2024. It's going to give us better information. The trouble is that those areas that we haven't sampled recently are now going to be another year since we sampled them. So we're sort of, it's a moving target. The longer we leave these areas, the less we know about them. So we are going to be this is going to be a better survey in 2025, but still, we still need to push forward to better surveys than that if we're going to get past this bottleneck.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm gonna just say a quick comment before you, Peggy. We're time to shut down now. Since everybody's been begging you to tell us what to do and you won't do it, we're gonna be forced to come up with our own opinion somehow. And I'd like to start in the morning with maybe putting up those slides where you had the 10% decline, 15%, 25. Let's look at that as a group and bat it around to where we really can make some decisions here, because our only other option is to keep asking you 10 more times. Peggy, go ahead.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that, do we want to start at 8 tomorrow or at 9? I think there's some leeway.
I don't care what's the room one.
We can think about that. Yeah.
8:30? Okay. Going up. Huh? It's fine.
So I did have a question for Dr. Stewart.
Okay.
I wondered if you have report number 12 in your computer, and it's on page 16 is the no conservation concern. Oh, sorry.
It's not my computer on the screen, but we probably do have
Report
presentation
12.
12.
Page or slide 16.
12 is the MSC presentation.
Yeah. If that's 12. I think it is. Yeah. No, yes, sorry. Okay, slide 16 is that one. So my question is, it says no conservation concern on the at the top. And I'm wondering, because I don't remember what he said when Dr. Hicks was presenting this. Was that an assumption, or was that this table does not present a conservation concern? Can you answer?
Thanks for calling up the slide, because now I know what we're talking about. This slide, that comment, no conservation concern, refers to this range of SPRs. So that what that means is that over the long-term projections from the MSE, we are not expected to be below B20% basically at all in the long-term projections. Now, the caveat to this is that these projections are done across all the full range of high and low PDO and the full range of high and low and everything in between weighted age. And right now we are essentially at the low end of both of those factors. And so one thing that came up earlier today in the main session and has come up several times is that I think the MSAB is going to ask Alan to do some projections where he does low weighted age and low PDO for the whole projection. So we can see how these various approaches perform. But in this particular context, the no conservation concern just references the fact that if we stuck to these SPRs over the long term, we should be okay. This simulation is only based on what we know, though. So the idea that we're trying out a new low spawning biomass doesn't really factor into these results.
I think I'll move to recess until the morning. That's okay with everyone? Keith seconds. Okay. 8:30.
Yes, please.
Leave them
on
here.
the table.
Okay.